Miles Emerson returned to Ashwell Cove for peace, but instead, a $2,500 trash fine was taped to his door. The late afternoon sun poured gold through the pine trees as he pulled into the gravel driveway, tires crunching like dry toast beneath his rental sedan. The cabin, with its familiar cedar siding and moss-soft roofline, stood waiting like an old friend. For a moment, his breath caught in his throat, the porch swing, the stack of firewood, the slight lean of the screen door, everything exactly as it had been the summer before. He stepped out, shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. Arizona had been too dry, too hot, too far from where things mattered. An email had come last November from a neighbor he barely remembered, something about new rules, strange fees. He hadn't given it a second thought. Now, the fluorescent pink paper curled in the breeze like a flag of war. He leaned in. Trash storage violation, $2,500, it read in bold Arial, clipped to the door with a bent staple and HOA letterhead. The official wording mentioned something called a Waste Visibility Compliance Protocol. Below that, a warning in italics. Non-compliance within 14 days will result in further action. Inside, the cabin welcomed him with its familiar musk of pinewood, faded rug, and the subtle scent of liniment soaked deep into the armrest of the couch. He dropped his bag and made coffee, decaf, as always, powdered creamer swirled in like a tiny storm cloud. He sipped it slowly, staring out the window at the lake. A heron stood statue still at the shoreline. Peace, after all, had a way of hiding in plain sight. But the envelope hadn't been a mistake. Not according to the HOA's website, which he browsed later that evening with growing unease. There it was, under a new category called Refuse Discipline Tiers. The wording was vague, almost lawyer-proof, but the penalties were sharp and escalated quickly. There was no reference to where or how these rules had been approved. No meeting minutes. No signatures. The next morning, he walked the 3 blocks to the Lakeview Diner, where the formica still shined like it was scrubbed by angels and the air smelled of bacon grease and toast. He took his usual booth by the window, unofficially his, even after being gone for 8 months. Linda, the waitress, greeted him with a smile. "Well, look what the lake dragged in," she said, placing the menu down but not expecting him to read it. "Still decaf?" "Of course. With powdered, please. And the meatloaf if it's Thursday." "It's Monday," she said. "But I'll see what we got." As he stirred the creamer in, a familiar thump of a cane echoed behind him. Jerry Olson slid into the booth opposite, the lines on his face deep as the lake itself. He wore a flannel shirt despite the heat and adjusted his cap that read USS Antietam, CV-36. "You got one too, huh?" Miles raised an eyebrow. "Trash fine." "Bird feeder," Jerry said. "Too close to the sidewalk." Said it attracted pest species. Last month it was Sally's garden gnome. Before that? Tom's wind chimes. Miles sighed. "Who's running this place now? Mussolini?" Jerry chuckled, but it was the kind that came with weight. "Virginia Crane. Took over the HOA last spring. Hasn't smiled since the Eisenhower administration. But she's got vision. And a lawyer cousin." After breakfast, $6 total, $2 tip, Miles walked past the town square, past the post office with its sagging flag, and stopped at the community bulletin board near the park. Yellowed notices layered over one another like the rings of a tree. In the bottom right corner, pinned just slightly askew, was a printed sheet labeled HOA Compliance Framework, Summer Revisions. He scanned it. Vague policy names, escalation tiers, enforcement dates. No clear signatures, no stamps, no clear point of contact. Just a printed note. Miles knew red flags when he saw them, and this $2,500 fine wasn't about trash. The printout still lay on the counter, the same neon pink glowing under the early morning light filtering through his kitchen window. Miles stared at it as he poured water into the coffee maker, the scent of cedarwood and old liniment blending with the slow drip of decaf. Years in federal audit taught him that ridiculous numbers usually hid ridiculous motives. This one stank of more than bad policy. He sat down at his modest desk near the window and opened his laptop. The HOA's online portal was poorly designed, cluttered with buttons that didn't lead anywhere and policy documents uploaded as scanned images, some blurry, some missing entirely. It took him over an hour to piece together a timeline of amendments. Clause after clause had been added within the last 18 months. New ones bore titles like waste aesthetics, curbside continuity, and visual tranquility violation parameters. None had author names. Most lacked voting records. The fine print was clever. Nothing outright illegal, but everything dangerously ambiguous. He tried calling the number listed under Contact Board Leadership. After 5 rings, a robotic voice thanked him and directed him to a voicemail inbox that hadn't been set up. The second number was for HOA administration. Someone picked up on the third ring. Ashwell Cove HOA office, came a bright, rehearsed voice. Joanne? Miles said, glancing at the name listed on the portal. Joanne Griggs? There was a pause, then a hesitant, yes, speaking. This is Miles Emerson, 67 Dockside. I received a fine. Oh, the trash placement, right? He blinked. Already reviewed? I'm just the receptionist, Mr. Emerson, she said smoothly. All violations are entered by field staff. If you want to dispute it, you'll need to submit a request to the review committee. And when do they meet? Next scheduled session is, let me check. October 3rd. Miles leaned back. It's July. They meet quarterly, she said brightly. All appeals must be submitted by the 15th of the prior month. But you can pay the fine to halt further action in the meantime. Of course I can, he said quietly. Thank you, Joanne. She offered a chipper "Have a great day," before hanging up. Later, at the Lakeview Diner, he found Ruthie Madsen already sipping iced tea under her wide-brimmed sun hat on the patio. Her floral print blouse looked straight out of a Sunday gardening catalog, and her sandals left faint impressions in the dusty wooden deck. She didn't bother with pleasantries. I heard about your ticket, she said, tilting her glass. Trash visibility. What a crock. Miles pulled out a chair. Jerry mentioned you'd had your own run-in. Non-approved flower colors, she said. I planted purple zinnias. Virginia said they clashed with HOA visual harmony. She huffed. That clash cost me $300. Then another $500 when I refused to dig them up. Miles raised an eyebrow. They actually enforced that? Oh yes. She's got this young guy with a clipboard who walks around like he's writing parking tickets for heaven. He sipped his coffee, now lukewarm. Know anything about the waste company they use? Trident Disposal, Ruthie said instantly. Used to be local, family-run. Now part owned by some firm out of Fond du Lac. I think Virginia's nephew's name is on the board. Of course it is, Miles said. Back at the cabin, the smell of warm pine hit him again as he stepped inside. He flipped on the overhead light in the kitchen and noticed something wedged in the edge of the doorframe. Another envelope. This one was white. He slid it open with the blunt edge of his keys and read slowly. HOA Non-Compliance Tier 2, subject to eviction proceedings if unpaid within 14 days. It was signed with a rubber stamp. No phone number. No board member signature. Just a checklist: trash violation, failure to respond, possible escalation. He walked to the desk, hands steady. Sat down. Opened his laptop again. The spreadsheet blinked at him, a blank grid. He muttered, so that's the game, and opened a blank spreadsheet titled HOA Exploitation. The HOA wanted to evict him over a trash bin. He was about to buy the heart of their summer revenue. The smell of sizzling bacon lingered in the air at the Blue Cove Diner, mingling with the faint scent of pine wafting through the open window. Miles stirred his decaf with powdered creamer as Linda topped off his cup and nodded toward the counter where Jerry and Ruthie sat whispering. You hear about the doc? Jerry said loud enough for it not to be gossip. Something's brewing. HOA's been quiet. Too quiet. Ruthie added, Virginia's been down there with a clipboard 3 mornings this week. I asked her if the summer potluck was back. She said, and I quote, we're reassessing all lake-facing assets. Miles set down his cup. After breakfast, he walked the lakefront path. The dock jutted out into Lake Winnebago like a crooked finger, its boards weathered and sun-bleached. He spotted Virginia Crane in a cream pantsuit, impractical for the lakeshore, gesturing at the pylons while 2 men took notes. She didn't see him, or at least pretended not to. The county records office was a boxy tan building that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and floor wax. Inside, the overhead lights buzzed like cicadas. A clerk pointed him to a battered workstation near the back, where he searched public filings. The lien had been placed 6 months ago. Filed under Ashwell Cove Community Recreation Easement, Parcel 19A, it detailed back payments on maintenance fees and noted intention to liquidate asset to recoup solvency. Then he saw it, a pending sale listing through Jenkins Lakefront Properties. Doug Jenkins. Miles smiled. Doug was enthusiastic but rarely asked more questions than required. That afternoon, he called Claire Monroe. They hadn't spoken in a year, but the tone of her voice when she answered, sharply amused, made it clear she was intrigued. Let me guess, she said. You found a buried asset, and you want to buy it without anyone knowing it's you. Something like that. Miles explained the lien, the HOA's silence, and the trash fine that sparked his curiosity. Claire was quiet for a moment, then said, You want me to build you a limited liability company that looks like it belongs to a local recreation cooperative? Yes. I already have a name, Blue Cove Recreation LLC. Classy. They filed papers that afternoon. Within 3 days, the LLC had a mailing address, tax ID, and escrow-ready documents. Miles transferred cash from his retirement portfolio, not enough to draw attention, but enough to move quickly. Doug Jenkins didn't even blink. Can't believe someone offered full cash, Doug said on the phone, voice tinged with relief. We've had that doc posted on the private listing site for months. HOA was getting desperate. Virginia called it a miracle sale. Said it'll help bridge their summer shortfall. Sounds like it, Miles said. Doug continued, honestly, I thought the dock was a pain to unload. It's old, warped. But hey, someone must see value in it. Miles thanked him, hung up, and stared out the window at the lake. His reflection in the glass looked calmer than he felt. That evening, the sun bled orange across the surface of the lake as he strolled down to the dock. A pair of herons skimmed low, wings brushing the water. The workers had just finished mounting the new sign, modest, wooden, neatly carved. Dock under new management. Public access pending. Miles smiled as the last screw went in, his shoes creaking softly on the planks, the scent of meatloaf and mashed potatoes still lingering on his shirt from dinner. A breeze caught the sign and made it sway gently in the twilight. He did. That evening, he sat on the cabin's back steps with a second mug of decaf and typed a short, respectful inquiry about the fine and its basis. He triple-checked his wording, clicked send, and waited. The reply came in under 4 minutes. Thank you for your inquiry. We appreciate your cooperation. Non-payment will escalate to enforcement. No name. No context. Just that. The wind picked up off the lake. Somewhere a screen door slammed. Kids laughed in the distance. He set the mug down slowly. That night, as fireflies lit up the path by the garden, he stepped outside to bring in the mail, and saw it. As Miles stepped onto his porch that evening, he sees another notice fluttering on his mailbox, enforcement pending. HOA thought they'd quietly offload the dock to cover their debts, until the buyer posted a new sign. Doug Jenkins's realty office was cool and overdecorated, a small-town shrine to flag pins and bald eagle calendars. A brass plaque near the door read proud sponsor of Lakefront Liberty, though Doug himself was more golden retriever than hawk. He offered Miles a bottle of root beer from a small fridge and leaned back in his chair like a man who had just scored a touchdown he didn't quite understand. Never seen a cleaner transaction, he said, fanning the folder with the signed transfer forms. Cash offers are rare these days. Virginia was practically giddy. Said the funds would reposition the HOA for a strong Q3. Miles nodded, keeping his face neutral. Claire sat beside him, legs crossed, fingers tapping lightly on her briefcase. She'd insisted on coming along to oversee the closing documents, her dry humor barely veiling her satisfaction. Blue Cove LLC, Doug said, tapping the signature page. Nice name. Sounds like a nature preserve. Claire smiled faintly. We like to think of it that way. Doug didn't question further. He didn't need to. The offer had been fast, legal, and exactly what the HOA needed to plug a budget hole they hoped no one noticed. Later that afternoon, the Ashwell Cove HOA hosted a brief public gathering by the park, where folding chairs were lined up under striped canopies and lemonade sweated in plastic pitchers. Virginia Crane wore a pearl necklace and a cream-colored blouse, standing straight-backed at the podium with a stack of note cards. We are pleased to announce the successful sale of the community dock, she declared, lips painted in a frostone mauve. This transaction secures necessary funds and ensures fiscal stability through the summer season. She didn't mention who had bought it. She didn't need to. To most, the dock had been just another asset shuffled off in silence. No one expected it to matter. Until that evening. By twilight, a new wooden sign had appeared at the head of the dock. The letters were burned into the surface with careful precision. New management pending access guidelines. Residents noticed. They always did. Ruthie passed by on her evening walk and stopped dead. Jerry, returning from the diner with a styrofoam box of peach cobbler, stood in the gravel staring at it. The whispers began. Who bought it? Is it going private? I thought the HOA still owned that. Miles stood on his porch, pretending to brush pine needles off his railing. He watched the quiet ripple of confusion move down the lakeshore like a breeze. Inside the Blue Cove diner the next morning, Doug sat at the counter, chatting with Tom Billings, the only HOA board member who showed up in a camo vest and clean boots. Virginia entered a few minutes later and ordered lemon water, her tone clipped. She hadn't slept, though she wouldn't admit it. Did you ever meet the buyer? She asked Doug casually. Doug hesitated, then chuckled. Nice enough guy. Quiet. I think he said he used to work for the IRS. Accountant, maybe. Virginia froze mid-stir. Tom raised an eyebrow. Later that evening, Miles stepped outside with a mug of lukewarm decaf just as the sun dipped behind the trees. He heard footsteps on the gravel road and glanced up. Virginia stood across the street, arms folded, eyes locked on his cabin. Her face gave away nothing, but she didn't move for a long moment. Then she turned and walked off without a word, the hem of her skirt catching in the breeze. You can run an HOA like a kingdom, but if the villagers stop kneeling, it crumbles fast. The folding chairs in the community hall creaked under shifting weight as more neighbors filed in than usual. It was standing room by the time Virginia Crane took the floor, clipboard in hand, hair pinned with surgical precision. The carpet smelled faintly of mildew and lemon disinfectant, and the flag above the podium sagged slightly at the corners. We regret to inform you, she began, that due to the unexpected sale of our dock, her voice paused, a beat too long, the HOA is facing a short-term revenue disruption. As such, we'll be raising quarterly dues by 28%. The ripple that moved through the crowd wasn't confusion. It was offense. From the second row, Tom Billings, back straight and arms crossed, cleared his throat. Was there ever a vote to sell the dock? He asked evenly. Virginia blinked. The board agreed. Emergency powers. Section 3.14 of our bylaws. I sit on the board, Tom replied. And I don't recall seeing a vote tally or minutes. Behind him, Janet Holloway, the HOA secretary, sat frozen. Her pen hovered mid-note. We'll circulate documentation, Virginia said briskly. At the Lakeview diner the next day, conversation was quieter than usual, but every booth was full. Ruthie sat across from Miles, stirring sweet iced tea with a slow, deliberate motion. She wore a sun hat wider than the table and had the focused look of someone who knew how to read a room. "People are talking about that emergency fund," she said, keeping her voice low. "You remember that flowerbed renewal they promised by the entrance?" Miles nodded. "Supposed to be done in May. Now they're saying next spring. Where'd the funds go?" Behind the counter, Linda shook her head as she refilled coffee. "HOA says inflation, but I haven't seen prices change for mulch since 2019. Miles left a $3 tip on his $9 tab and took the long way back to the cabin. On the street corner, someone had tacked up a flyer titled "Where Did the Money Go?" in blocky, photocopied text. By sunset, things escalated. A video surfaced on the community Facebook page. In it, Virginia was caught on camera confronting a teenage boy who dared step onto the dock. "This is now private property," she snapped, pointing with a trembling hand. "Do you understand that? Trespassing." The boy's father, off camera, could be heard replying, "It used to be community property. You sold it." Virginia's response, "You're all ungrateful and misinformed," didn't help her case. The video had over 300 views by nightfall, a viral number in a town of just over 800. At the next HOA gathering, the mood shifted. Neighbors avoided eye contact with Virginia. Tom stood by the back wall, watching. Janet sat stiffly, no longer taking notes. Ruthie leaned over to Miles midway through the meeting and whispered, "Watch who walks out." By the time Virginia proposed a new access license fee for lake usage, 3 couples had already stood and quietly left. One man muttered, "She sold our access and blamed us," loud enough for others to hear. Virginia's voice cracked on her next sentence. That night, as the cicadas buzzed and the lake shimmered under the porch light, Miles heard a soft knock. He opened the door to find Janet standing there, folder clutched tight. "I think you'll want to see this ledger. You can rig a system, but it only takes one good auditor to flip the entire table." Miles's cabin smelled like printer ink and burnt coffee. Piles of paper covered every flat surface, the dining table, the ottoman, even the windowsill. The once serene view of Lake Winnebago now peeked through a fortress of manila folders and highlighters. The spreadsheet on his laptop had changed. What began in silence after a trash fine had grown into something with teeth. HOA exploitation.xlsx now held 6 tabs, each neatly color-coded, tracking disbursements, signatures, and unexplained consulting fees. The ledger Janet brought over had been the key. At first glance, it looked like a simple monthly report, but deeper, it whispered stories. Of money moved with purpose. Of community funds funneling into silence. Janet sat across from him now, the same folder open between them. She wore reading glasses pushed halfway down her nose and a fleece jacket zipped to the collar despite the warmth. "You see this?" Miles tapped a payment entry marked Marigold Strategy Partners, Community Engagement Services. $12,000 last quarter. Sounds vaguely legit. "It would be," Miles said, "except Marigold Strategy Partners doesn't have a website, phone number, or tax record. But I did find a property lease in Fond du Lac under the same name." "The landlord?" "Virginia Crane's niece." Janet blew out a breath. "And that's not all," Miles continued. "Look at this expense, $3,400 for beautification enhancements, same vendor listed 3 times, same invoice code. Triple billing." They were still poring over records when Tom arrived, a steaming Dutch oven in hand. "Brought chili," he said simply. "And cornbread. Figured you'd need fuel." He set the pot down without ceremony and leaned in over the documents. "What are we looking at?" "Embezzlement," Miles said. "And maybe fraud. Depends on what the assessor says." The next morning, the fluorescent lights at the county tax assessor's office flickered overhead like they were reluctant to reveal anything. A tired clerk flipped through property classification records, his frown deepening with every page. "This can't be right," he muttered. "That Greenbelt parcel, HOA claimed it's recreational use, but these notes say it's leased for private events. They're paying agricultural rates, not commercial." Miles said nothing. He didn't need to. Back in Ashwell Cove, Tom drove them both to the HOA records room, a dusty annex behind the community center. Janet waited inside, a stack of file folders in her arms, eyes alert. "She's been moving files," she whispered. "Rearranging things, pulling older documents. At night." "Got proof?" Tom asked. Janet nodded toward the corner. "Security camera still records to a hard drive. I pulled the footage." That evening, under the flicker of Miles's desk lamp, they watched the grainy footage. Virginia, in heels and a trench coat, unlocking the records room at 11:03 p.m., hauling out boxes labeled Financials Q1, Q3, her trunk yawning open in the dark. Tom leaned back, shaking his head. "Well, that's enough for me." They drafted a motion that night. It took them 4 hours. Claire helped clean up the legal phrasing via email, careful not to reveal herself. By midnight, Miles uploaded the final PDF to the HOA board's portal. The subject line read simply: "Motion to present financial findings, next board vote requested." HOA board meetings aren't known for excitement, until someone presses play on a recording. The Ashwell Cove Community Hall smelled like furniture polish and distant memories. Mismatched folding chairs scraped across linoleum as neighbors filed in, whispering, nodding, filling every row. The bulletin board by the door bore faded flyers for bake sales and lost pets, corners curling with age. Under the dim glow of overhead fluorescence, Tom Billings stood at the makeshift podium, clearing his throat. "This emergency session," he began, "has been convened under HOA Bylaw 7.4, in light of substantial concerns regarding financial misconduct." The room rustled with attention. Virginia Crane entered 10 minutes late, heels sharp against the floor, eyes scanning the crowd with disbelief. She carried a slim portfolio and an expression just this side of contempt. "This is irregular," she snapped. "There was no board-approved agenda." "You're not presiding tonight," Tom interrupted calmly. "We've received a motion with supporting documentation. Mr. Emerson has the floor." Miles stood slowly, papers in hand, glasses low on his nose. He wore a pressed flannel shirt and corduroy slacks, respectable, unassuming. But his voice, when it came, was steady and cool. "Over the past month," he began, "several residents, including myself, have compiled and verified data indicating misappropriation of HOA funds. These findings include..." He paused, holding up a handout. Janet moved through the aisles distributing copies, charts, tables, annotated footnotes. "Multiple payments made to entities owned or affiliated with President Crane's relatives, including Marigold Strategy Partners and Crane Seasonal Services. Landscaping invoices tripled from last year, despite fewer projects. Emergency funds rerouted. A second lien filed, without vote, on common green space to leverage a private loan." There were gasps. Jerry shook his head slowly. Ruthie clutched a Tupperware of cherry pie on her lap. "This is slander," Virginia cut in, her voice rising. "It's unverified data from a disgruntled retiree. You people don't understand how much work I've put into." Miles raised a small voice recorder and pressed play. A brief crackle. Then Virginia's voice, clipped and unmistakable. "Get those files out before anyone starts snooping. And clean up the books, don't leave any trails this time." A collective hush fell. Then murmurs, loud and sharp. "That's her," she said, this time. "My God. I paid $900 for flowers that never got planted." Virginia stepped back. "You have no context. That recording is illegal." Tom stood, face hardening. "I move to remove President Virginia Crane effective immediately." Hands shot up across the room, fishermen, former teachers, church volunteers. Wrinkled knuckles raised with quiet fury. Only 2 hands stayed down. "The motion passes," Tom said. Virginia stared, mouth open. Her papers slipped slightly in her grip. "You'll all regret this," she muttered, stumbling toward the back. The sheriff, brought as neutral presence, now more alert, rose silently and followed her out, the door clicking closed behind them. The HOA lost its grip, but the lake gained something it hadn't had in years: community. The morning air in Ashwell Cove was crisp for August, the kind of breeze that whispered of summer's slow surrender. Lake Winnebago sparkled under the sun, its surface glassy, broken only by the occasional heron gliding low across the water. The dock, once splintered and leaning, now stood sturdy and freshly painted, its wooden slats gleaming with sealant and care. Miles Emerson walked its length just after sunrise, coffee in hand, alone except for the gulls. The humming stillness he had once hoped for when he returned weeks ago had finally arrived, not the silence of tension, but of peace. By mid-afternoon, folding tables sprouted across the lawn near the shore. Ruthie, in a wide sun hat and lemon print apron, arranged trays of deviled eggs with military precision. Jerry supervised the hot dogs, his cane propped against the grill like a flagpole. The cafe waitress, whose name Miles had finally learned was Carrie, handed out paper cups of lemonade and potato salad in styrofoam bowls. Tom and Janet moved between clusters of neighbors, fielding questions, accepting handshakes. Someone had brought a speaker, and soft country music drifted across the breeze: Patsy Cline, a little George Strait. The mood wasn't triumphant. It was settled. Like something fractured had been mended with thread and neighborly hands. "Didn't think I'd live to see this," Jerry said, nudging Miles as they stood at the buffet table. "I thought democracy died in this town." Miles smiled. "Turns out it just took a nap." The new bylaw transparency policy had passed unanimously 2 days earlier. So had the symbolic lease, the dock, now owned by Blue Cove LLC, granted to the HOA for $1 a year. The only stipulation? Full public access, no restrictions, and no fees. Virginia Crane had moved out quietly the week prior. No farewell, no email blast, no final flourish. Her for sale sign disappeared in the night. Someone said she'd relocated to a condo in Appleton. No one asked for details. As the sun dipped lower, the community gathered on the dock. Lawn chairs lined the walkway. Children dangled fishing lines into the water while cicadas buzzed in the trees behind them. Miles cleared his throat and stepped forward, holding a small plaque wrapped in linen. Ruthie adjusted his collar like a proud aunt. Tom stood beside him, nodding. Janet blinked back what looked suspiciously like tears. Miles pulled the cloth away. The metal gleamed gold in the dusk light. To those who stood when standing was hardest. A hush fell over the group. Then clapping, slow and steady, spread like ripples. Later, as the fireflies took over the shoreline and plates clinked into bins, Miles returned to his porch with a full heart and an empty lemonade cup. A small envelope sat tucked under his door. No return address. He opened it and scanned the letter. It was from a town called Clearpoint Shores. Their HOA was having issues. The letter ended simply: "We heard what you did in Ashwell Cove. We could use your help." Miles folded the page neatly, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and looked toward the lake. Then he smiled. In the quiet that returned to Ashwell Cove, there was something deeper than peace. It was the sound of neighbors finding one another again. What began as a fine for a misplaced trash bin became a reckoning, reminding everyone that rules should serve the people, not silence them. When ordinary folks choose to stand together, even the firmest grip on power begins to slip. Like a dock rebuilt by steady hands, a community's strength lies not in its leaders, but in those who refuse to be led astray.